The Middle East had seen wars before. It had endured proxy conflicts, assassinations, blockades, and sanctions campaigns stretching across decades. But nothing in recent memory had prepared the region or the world for what unfolded in the pre-dawn darkness of February 28, 2026. On that morning, Israel and the United States launched surprise airstrikes on multiple sites and cities across Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and numerous other Iranian officials. In a single night, the most consequential threshold in modern Middle Eastern history was crossed, and what followed would redefine the architecture of power in the region for a generation. For months before the attack, the CIA had been tracking the locations and patterns of Khamenei and had learned that a meeting of senior officials was to take place with his attendants, so the strikes were planned to coincide with the meeting. The intelligence operation was breathtaking in its precision and audacity. A previous attempt to assassinate Khamenei by Israel during the 12-day war in June 2025 had been vetoed by Trump, according to unnamed U.S. officials. After that conflict, Khamenei became increasingly reclusive, and the bunker in his compound was so deep that its elevator took more than 5 minutes to reach it, making opportunities to strike exceedingly rare. But patience, surveillance, and an unprecedented level of intelligence coordination finally created the window, and this time the order was given. Israel's military said that top Iranian security officials were among those killed, including the country's defense minister, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the secretary of the Iranian Security Council, a close advisor to Khamenei. The decapitation strike was not a warning. It was designed to be terminal. On March 1st, Chief of Staff Abdul Rahim Mousavi and former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad were confirmed by Iranian state media to have also been killed by strikes. Tehran's command structure, that meticulously built over 4 decades, had been gutted in hours. Hours before Trump announced the supreme leader's death, an NPR source with knowledge of the strikes confirmed Khamenei was killed by an Israeli strike. By the time Iranian state television confirmed what the world already suspected, the Islamic Republic was in a state of organized rage. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian described the killing as a great crime and declared that Iran viewed revenge as its legitimate right and duty. Iran declared 40 days of national mourning. But mourning and retaliation were not mutually exclusive. Within hours of Khamenei's death being confirmed, the missiles were already in the air. Iran responded with missile and drone strikes against Israel, U.S. bases, and U.S. allied countries in the region. Iran launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at targets in Israel and at U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. The sheer geographic breadth of the Iranian counterstrike stunned military analysts worldwide. This was not a symbolic retaliation. This was a coordinated multi-theater military campaign. Iran also said it would shut the Strait of Hormuz, a major oil and trading route. Shipping was affected and regional oil and gas production was cut. The economic reverberations were immediate and global. The head of Saudi Arabia's state oil company said that although it would reroute some exports through the Red Sea, continued war would yield drastic effects on the world economy. International Monetary Fund Chief Kristalina Georgieva said that every 10% increase in energy prices over the course of 2026 was expected to increase global inflation by almost 0.5%. What had begun as a targeted military operation was now threatening to destabilize the global economic order. By March 5th, a military source told Fars news agency that Iran had fired over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and almost 2,000 drones since February 28th. Almost 40% of the launches were aimed at Israel, and almost 60% were fired towards U.S. targets in the region. The numbers were staggering. Iran was not retreating into defensive posture. It was waging sustained offensive warfare across an entire region simultaneously. The question on every military analyst's lips was not whether Iran could retaliate. It was whether the Islamic Republic could sustain the tempo. And then came the 54th wave. On March 15, 2026, 16 days after the war began, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a terse, deliberate statement. Iranian armed forces launched the 54th wave of their True Promise 4 operations against Israeli and American targets, firing an array of advanced missiles, including the Sejjil missile for the first time since the imposed war began. The IRGC announced the retaliatory operation was executed under the operation code Ya Zara. The name itself carried the weight of religious symbolism. Ya Zara, a cry invoking the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, a name that resonates with grief, righteous anger, and indomitable resistance in Shia Islamic tradition. This was not merely a military statement. It was a declaration of civilizational fury. The Sejjil had been a name whispered in defense circles for years. Now it thundered across the Middle East. Iran says its long-range Sejjil missile entered the confrontation for the first time, marking what analysts describe as a significant escalation in the ongoing military standoff with Israel. To understand why this mattered, one must understand what the Sejjil actually is. The Sejjil 2 is 18 meters long, 1.25 meters in diameter, and has a launch weight of 23.6 tons, 5 to 6 times heavier than the Fatah hypersonic missile. This was not a precision instrument of harassment. This was a weapon of strategic mass, engineered for annihilation of hardened targets. The missile measures about 17.5 meters in length, carries a warhead weighing roughly 650 kilograms, and according to Iranian military statements, can travel from the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran to Tel Aviv in approximately 7 minutes. 7 minutes. From launch to impact. No intercept window, no second chances. What made the Sejjil categorically different from Iran's other strategic assets was the nature of its propulsion. The Sejjil missile is considered one of Iran's most significant ballistic systems. Developed domestically, it uses solid fuel, allowing faster launch preparation compared with liquid fuel missiles and potentially improving survivability during military operations. Liquid fuel missiles require hours of complex fueling procedures, leaving them vulnerable to preemptive strikes during preparation. The Sejjil required none of that. It could sit dormant in a hardened launcher, invisible to satellite reconnaissance, and be made combat-ready in minutes. For Israeli air defenses, already under extraordinary strain, this was a nightmare scenario. Iran has also developed an upgraded version known as Sejjil 2, which incorporates improvements in navigation and guidance systems, reportedly using a combined guidance system integrating GPS and inertial navigation that some reports claim can reduce the margin of error to less than 10 meters. Beyond its engineering specifications, the missile carried deep symbolic freight. Sejjil refers to the Quranic story in Surah Al-Fil, where stones of Sejjil were said to have destroyed an invading army. Iranian commentators often cite the reference as a symbol of deterrence and resistance. By naming this weapon after a divine act of retribution, the destruction of an army that sought to desecrate Mecca, Iran was broadcasting a theological message alongside a military one. The stone that brought down the army of the elephant. Now it had wings and a warhead. For the first time in Operation True Promise 4, the strategic and solid fuel missile, Sejjil, was fired against the centers of management and decision-making that influenced the Zionist regime's air-based operations. The IRGC stated that the Israeli regime's key infrastructures influential in its military and defense industries, as well as gathering places of Israeli military forces, had been successfully targeted in the heart of the occupied territories. The targets were not random. They were chosen with precision: command and control nodes, air operation centers, military-industrial infrastructure. Iran was not attempting to terrorize civilians. It was attempting to blind and cripple the Israeli military machine. An Iranian missile strike reportedly damaged the residence of a United States consular official in Tel Aviv on Sunday, as Tehran launched the new wave of attacks. The strike on the consular residence was a signal of audacious intent. Iran was no longer compartmentalizing its retaliation to military targets. American presence in the region, diplomatic, consular, logistical, was now fair game. The message was unmistakable. The United States had entered this war as a combatant, and it would be treated as one. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told CBS that the war was initiated by the United States and Israel, and that Iran would continue to defend itself. This war was started by President Trump and the United States by their own choice, Araghchi said, adding that Iran would continue defending its people no matter how long it takes. Meanwhile, the weight of 16 days of sustained warfare was beginning to tell on Israel's defensive architecture. The failure of Israel's Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow 3 air defense systems to intercept Iranian ballistic missiles and drones, particularly due to features like hypersonic speed, maneuverability, radar stealth, and the use of cluster warheads, exposed the structural weaknesses of Israel's defense network. These systems had been built and marketed as impenetrable shields. Iran had now empirically demonstrated their limits. Israel's stringent media censorship and attempts to conceal the extent of the damage, coupled with reports from the New York Times revealing a shortage of Arrow 3 interceptors, confirmed the enemy's inability to manage the crisis. The interceptor stockpiles were running critically low. Every Sejjil that flew increased the probability that the next one would land unopposed. A multitude of missiles, including the super-heavy Khorramshahr with double warheads, K-Bar, Qadr, and Ahmad, were deployed alongside the Sejjil. This was a layered, saturating strategy. By mixing missile types, varying in speed, trajectory, and approach angle, Iran was systematically overwhelming the prioritization algorithms of Israeli air defense batteries. High-speed ballistic missiles demanded one type of intercept solution, slower cruise missiles another, drone swarms an entirely different response. Deploying all simultaneously forced the defense to make impossible choices in real time. It was operational art at the highest level, and it was working. A senior Iranian security official told Al-Mayadeen that there is currently no scenario for a ceasefire and no option available to end the war. These were not the words of a government in distress. They were the words of a government that had calculated its position, absorbed the initial shock of decapitation, reconstituted command authority, and concluded that continued warfare served its strategic interests better than any available diplomatic off-ramp. Iran's new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei issued his first public statement since being appointed, demanding the immediate closure of all U.S. military bases in the Middle East and insisting the Strait of Hormuz must remain closed as leverage against enemies. A new Supreme Leader had emerged from the rubble of the old. The continuity of the Islamic Republic's defiance was structural, not personal. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi called the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran unacceptable, condemning the blatant killing of a sovereign leader and the incitement of regime change. China stated it was highly concerned that the situation in the Middle East may be pushed into a dangerous abyss. But concern from Beijing and Moscow had not translated into intervention. The great powers watched, calculated, and supplied, each actor using the conflict to advance its own long-term positioning. The world had not seen a war with these stakes in decades, and every government on Earth was quietly gaming out the scenarios. What the 54th wave of Operation True Promise confirmed was something deeper than a military exchange. It confirmed that Iran, despite losing its supreme leader, despite having its military command partially dismembered, despite facing the combined air power of the United States and Israel simultaneously, had not broken. The coordinated use of advanced ballistic missiles such as Fatah-1, Qadr Ahmad, Hajj Qasim, K-Bar Shekan, and Sejjil, alongside kamikaze drones like Shahed-136 and Arash-2, not only showcased Iran's technical prowess in designing and producing diverse weaponry, but also highlighted the country's precise and cohesive strategy in overcoming Israel's sophisticated air defense systems. This was an indigenous, self-sustaining military capability built over 40 years of sanctions, isolation, and existential pressure. It could not be bombed away in a single campaign. The Sejjil had entered the war, its arc across the dark skies of the Middle East, leaving a dazzling light trail in Tehran's skies that became a viral symbol of Iran's defiance on social media, was more than a missile in flight. It was the signature of a civilization that had decided it would not submit. 16 days into a war, no one outside a small circle of decision-makers had predicted the region stood at the edge of something far larger than any of its architects had publicly acknowledged. The Sejjil had been unleashed, and the world was watching to see what came next.